Did you know that a normal person left completely alone in a dark and silent room can begin losing their mind and seeing terrifying hallucinations that are not real in just 48 hours? Yes, without any physical torture, simply the absence of everything can force the human brain to begin destroying itself. Human psychology is one of the most complex yet most fragile mechanisms in the universe. So what happens inside a person's brain when they lose their freedom, become trapped, and fall under the complete control of others? How does a captive end up falling in love with the very tormentor who tortured them? What terrifying, unethical experiments have scientists conducted in order to understand human behavior? In this video, we will descend into the darkest corners of human psychology. We will examine captive psychology, official scientific papers, and some of the most secret experiments in history. If you are ready, let's begin. In the first moments after a person is captured, kidnapped, or completely isolated, the brain enters a state known as the acute stress response. This is our evolutionary fight or flight mechanism, but in captivity, you cannot fight and you cannot run. Psychological research shows that the first stage of captivity is denial and shock. The human brain does not want to accept the reality of what is happening. It assumes that this is a dream and that it will soon wake up. But as hours turn into days, the situation begins to change. According to reports by the U.S. Department of Defense on prisoners of war and psychological studies, during the first 72 hours of captivity, the following hormonal changes occur in the human body. There is a surge of cortisol and adrenaline. The body remains in a constant state of alarm. Sleep becomes almost impossible. The process of losing the sense of time begins. In a place without windows or clocks, the brain cannot calculate how many hours or how many days have passed. This is one of the first factors that begins to drive a person mad. The well-known psychiatrist Viktor Frankl was a scientist who survived the Nazi camps during World War II. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, and in his scientific notes, he wrote that the first reaction of people brought into a concentration camp was illusion, a blind belief that everything would somehow turn out well at the last moment. But when that belief was shattered, it was replaced by an inner death, complete numbness and apathy. But the dark side of science does not end there. In the 1950s and 1960s, under the CIA's MK-Ultra program, sensory deprivation experiments were carried out to control the minds of captives and volunteers. Special goggles and headphones were placed on the subject so that their senses of sight, hearing, and touch were almost completely shut down. When the human brain receives no signals from the outside world, it begins to collapse inward. Studies showed that this type of captivity could cause more severe psychological destruction than physical pain. The person begins to lose the sense of their own body, and their identity starts to break apart. The most paradoxical and unbelievable side of captive psychology is this: Stockholm Syndrome. It all began in 1973 with a bank robbery in Stockholm. The robbers held 4 bank employees hostage for 6 days. After the police operation, everyone expected the hostages to hate the robbers. But something shocking happened. The hostages refused to testify against the robbers in court and even began raising money for their defense. One of the female hostages later fell in love with one of the robbers in prison. But how is this possible? Why does the brain love and protect someone who has placed it in danger? According to psychological papers, this is a survival mechanism. When a captive becomes completely helpless and realizes that their life is in the hands of the other person, they unconsciously begin to take the captor's side. A small act of kindness from the captor, for example, giving them a glass of water or simply not killing them, begins to look like a great mercy in the captive's eyes. The captive thinks, if I think like them, they will not kill me. This is not love, it is a neurotic attachment born entirely from fear. The most dangerous stage in captive psychology is learned helplessness. Discovered by psychologist Martin Seligman, this phenomenon explains how living beings exposed to trauma and unavoidable negative situations for a long period of time may stop trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. Imagine a captive who has been locked away for years. The door has always been locked. One day, by accident, the door is left open, but the captive does not walk through that door and run, because inside their brain, the belief that escape is impossible has already become official reality. Clinical papers written on this subject show that the vast majority of people released from captivity suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Physically, they may be free, but mentally, they are still inside that dark room. They cannot adapt to normal life. In fact, many former captives, after being released, feel such inner emptiness and fear that they want to return to closed spaces and isolate themselves again. Because the brain has started to see the captive status it was used to for so long as a safe zone. In 1957, an American sociologist named Albert Bitterman studied the behavior of prisoners of war who returned from the Korean War. The question that interested him was deeply disturbing. Why had some prisoners confessed to crimes they had not committed, repeated the enemy's words, and sometimes obeyed orders faster than expected? At first glance, these behaviors could look like betrayal, but Bitterman's research reached a different conclusion. The problem was not in the person's character, but in the psychological system they had been placed inside. Captivity does not only tie a person's hands and feet, it also targets their sense of choice, their sense of time, their social support, and their ability to evaluate reality. Bitterman explained this system through what later became known as the coercion framework. This framework included 8 main methods: isolation, control of perception, induced exhaustion, threats, occasional concessions, demonstrating absolute power, humiliation, and forcing the person to obey meaningless commands. Each of these methods may seem simple when viewed separately, but when they work together, they create deep changes in the human brain. The first mechanism is isolation. The captive is cut off from friends, family, comrades, and the familiar world. At that point, the person is not merely alone. They are also deprived of the people who confirm their reality. In normal life, a person measures their fear, doubt, and thoughts through the reactions of others. But in captivity, that mirror is shattered. According to Bitterman's findings, isolation is one of the main ways to weaken a captive's ability to resist. Because the longer a person remains alone, the more psychologically focused they become on the people holding them. This is a survival response, tracking the danger. Because now, their safety no longer depends on their own decisions, but on the reactions of the other side. The second mechanism is the control of perception. The captive does not know what time it is. Day and night begin to blend together. They do not know what is happening, where the war is, whether their family is alive, or whether their own side is even searching for them. This uncertainty is a direct blow to the brain. When a person cannot calculate the future, they cannot make plans. And when they cannot make plans, resistance begins to weaken. This condition brings to mind Donald Hebb's research on sensory deprivation. In the 1950s, at McGill University, participants in sensory deprivation experiments were separated as much as possible from external stimuli. As a result, some people experienced attention problems, anxiety, a weakened sense of reality, and confused thinking. This finding is extremely important for captivity, because in captivity, a person is not only physically trapped. When the brain cannot receive information, it fills the empty space with possibilities. And those possibilities are usually fed by fear. The third mechanism is exhaustion and weakening. Sleeplessness, long periods of waiting, hunger, cold, uncertainty, and constant tension weaken a person's ability to make decisions. An exhausted person resists less because their brain is no longer thinking about big principles. It is thinking about how to make the pain stop in the next minute. At that point, they may repeat what the enemy says. They may sign any document. They may say words that do not belong to them. The logic behind forced confessions in Biderman's research becomes clear here. Sometimes, a person speaks not because they believe what they are saying, but because they need it to stop. The fourth mechanism is threat. For a captive, a threat can sometimes have a longer-lasting effect than actual violence. It keeps the brain's danger system constantly activated. Under continuous threat, a person's thinking narrows. They think less about the future, their family, their homeland, or ideology, and more about when the person in front of them will punish them. At this point, the captive begins to regulate their behavior. They speak less, they agree more. They even calculate eye contact. The fifth mechanism is occasional mercy. This is one of the most dangerous psychological mechanisms. If the enemy is always cruel, the captive sees them only as a threat. But if that same person sometimes gives food, sometimes speaks calmly, sometimes delays punishment, or sometimes says, "You are a smart person," the brain begins to become confused. The captive may read this behavior as mercy. In reality, it is part of the control mechanism, because in total darkness, the human mind sees even a small light as a great hope. A more accurate explanation is this: the captive adapts to the source of danger, because in order to survive, they are trying to manage that source. The sixth mechanism is learned helplessness. This theory became famous through the research of Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer. The main idea in their work was this: if a living being repeatedly faces pain or a negative event it cannot control, it may later remain passive even when a way out becomes available. This is a very powerful explanation in the psychology of captivity. At first, the captive resists and is punished. These actions are repeated again and again. After a while, the brain reaches a conclusion: nothing is under my control. Once this thought settles in, the person's behavior changes. They no longer make plans for freedom. They no longer search for ways to resist. They only search for ways to suffer less harm. That is why some captives may hesitate, even when an opportunity for freedom appears, because inside their brain, freedom no longer looks like a real choice. It looks like a new danger. The seventh mechanism is the relationship between roles and power. One of the most famous studies on this subject is the Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, under the leadership of Philip Zimbardo, students were divided into the roles of prisoners and guards inside a simulated prison environment. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, but it was stopped after 6 days because the behavior of some participants in the guard role became harsher, while participants in the prisoner role began showing signs of severe stress and emotional breakdown. Riker and Haslam's BBC prison study showed that people do not become cruel or passive simply because they are assigned a role. Group identity, leadership, legitimacy, and the weakening of collective resistance also play major roles. This conclusion is very important for captivity. When a captive feels alone, resistance weakens. But if there is strong group identity, mutual support, and moral unity among captives, their chances of standing against pressure increase. The eighth mechanism is humiliation and the erasure of identity. The captive is addressed not by name, but by number. Their former status, rank, profession, family role, and personal dignity are weakened. The goal is not simply to hurt them. The goal is to prevent them from feeling like the person they once were. If the captive still sees themselves as a soldier, a father, a child, a friend, and a citizen, then an inner anchor remains. But if they begin to see themselves only as a body waiting for orders, resistance becomes much harder. This is also connected to the concept of de-individuation in social psychology. As a person loses their individual identity, they can become more deeply trapped inside the role the system assigns to them. All of these experiments and scientific facts prove one thing to us. The human body can endure physical blows, but in the face of mental isolation, fear, and the restriction of freedom, the brain begins to change its own structure. We are not as strong as we think. Our environment and circumstances can turn us in a very short time into a creature we would no longer recognize. The psychology of captivity shows us that freedom is not just a physical condition, it is one of the most basic needs of the human brain. So what do you think about this? If you had been part of the Stanford experiment, would you have become cruel in the role of a guard or completely obedient in the role of a prisoner? Write your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel to learn more about the dark secrets of the human brain. Until we meet in the next video, stay free.